Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to the COMIT virtual happy hour. Thank you very much for joining us all today. This is a place for a friendly chat about a hot topic over a coffee, a beer, or whatever takes your fancy. So today's topic, blockchain. It's not just for cryptocurrency. It has been identified as an immutable public ledger for generating and verifying compliance information. COMIT will shortly share how to demonstrate fit-for-task compliance of workers by building the critical bridge between occupational health and construction using the blockchain-enabled digital passports. But firstly, a little bit about COMIT. For those that are new to this, what is COMIT? Well, COMIT is a community made up of owners, contractors, solution providers, and academia. COMIT has a history of developing and running projects and webinars with a focus on increasing productivity for better outcomes. Often the best improvements come from a combination of knowledge, process, and technology. By being collaborative with all of our stakeholders, we create value and enablement through process improvement. And by setting up and delivering these all-important demonstration projects, our long-term aim is to reduce capital project costs and a reduction in cycle times. So how does COMIT do this? Well, we have community days. Those are peer-to-peer collaboration meetings. We do 4+ days a year. We run regular webinars. We have projects. There's no better way to early adoption than proving it practically in the field. We have a drone community that started as a project and that is now a working community. We partner with other organisations and we have events. We've got a conference and showcase for technology coming up in May and June next year. 2 events that we've run this year. One was in February at the Red Bull Technology Campus in Milton Keynes, sponsored by Siemens. The last one we just had was at JCB, supported by Sunbelt Rentals. And the next one we've got coming up is in October at Nifty Lift in Milton Keynes. I mentioned about webinars. These are regular. We run these every 2 to 4 weeks. And the idea, as I said at the beginning, is to set up a topic that will draw an audience, create an education, and have a panel of subject matter experts that can answer questions on the subject. I mentioned about the drone community. This started as a project. Excuse me, just jumped on. This is a very active area, and there's a lot of interest generated from this. Projects, we've got a project that's kicked off earlier this year, and this is the Commit to 5G project. As I said, no better way to adoption than practically proving it in the field, and this is a very exciting project as we hear from the members. We also have a Commit to Safety group, which is relatively new. COMIT on the call today and presenting a part of this group. Anybody interested in hearing more, get in touch. So I'm going to put a bit of context into today's session. And why is construction safety important? Well, of course, there are many hazards. It's a dangerous environment and an ever-changing landscape. Safety is everybody's business, and by that I mean all stakeholders who are likely to be involved. 3% of construction workers sustain a work-related injury, and around 4% are suffering from a work-related illness. Taking the UK as an example, there are 80,000 construction workers who suffer from work-related bad health each year, and 64,000 who suffer non-fatal injuries. So safety is everybody's business. These are the most common health and safety risks according to the HSE. As you can see, slips, trips and falls are at the top, but of course, descending through electricity, moving objects, working at height, etc. I painted a very dark picture, but it's not all bad. We should ask this question: how are we doing? Now, without sounding complacent, where safety is concerned, as you can see, the trend shows that things are improving and have been for quite a while. But can we do better? Absolutely. The problem is, how do we maintain this downwards trend? That's the challenge. And in construction, we like challenges. We also have regulations. And the best way to make something happen, you guessed it, is to make it law. Our objective is to avoid this. This job has worked no days without an accident. I really hope that nobody sees this except on the morning of day one. And we set our sights on something like this. 3,250,000 safe hours worked. By thinking differently and using technology, there is a way. And looking into new ways of safe working, including using digital technology, there is strong evidence that the industry is improving its safety record using technology. Okay, so thanks for listening to that. I hope I put it in context. We did some questions at registration. Thanks for everybody that participated in that. I'm not going to answer them now. These are the results. We're going to go through this at the end. So stick with us because there's some interesting insights to share. Talking of questions, if anybody has any questions as we go through, just stick them in the questions box on the right-hand side and send them over, and we will answer those when we get to the session at the end. So I'm now going to introduce the team. So we've got Adrian, we've got Shay, and we've got Chibuza. Adrian, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And you see a full face there, and that's Eddie, who's a very good friend of mine, Eddie Quicker. Unfortunately, Eddie was going to join us today, but he's got a little family medical thing going on, so he's not going to join us. But he has certainly agreed that we can share his slides. So just big caveat, Stuart and myself, we're not occupational health practitioners, but we will share the slides. So feel free to ask any questions in that area, and we will get back to you with those. So I'm Adi Walter, I'm the head of UK here for COMIT. We are a technology company. I've had a long career in tech, but I also had a short career in occupational health, and it was that short career in occupational health working with Eddie that opened my eyes up to a huge opportunity for digital transformation in this space. And I'm really happy to have on the call today our partner, Amazon Web Services. So Shay's sitting there in Southern California. He's come and joined us early morning, and he's going to be the expert on everything blockchain. And I've got Chibuza, who's our co-founder, who's sitting in Dubai. So it's later in the day for Chibuza, who's going to come and talk about the technology that we're building. So next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Keep going. Yeah. So what we're going to do just through the next sort of 45 minutes, we're going to start with occupational health and safety. We're going to set the scene from that perspective. Then we're going to bring it up a layer and look at all of the credentials that we need in construction in order to get workers fit for work to be on site. What we're then going to do is a deeper dive on why blockchain, and then we're going to talk about the COMIT Care industry pilot that we were running starting August the 22nd in the UK. And then we'll wrap it up, and then as Stuart has said, is bring it back for Q&A and summary. So Stuart, let me just also bring you back at this point. So if we move into the next slide. So Stuart, you and I were talking in your career, you've got a massive passion for safety. So you were sitting on the other side of this equation, and you had to make sure that your teams, right, were healthy in order to go and work for safety, right? So if we just go to the next slide. So occupational health. So we hear about, you must have heard about the different, must hear about the different classifications that we hear. So in terms of fit for work, fit for task, fit for construction, what does that really mean? What does that really mean? And actually what it means is that in order to have someone that's fit for construction and therefore fit for work, you have to go all the way down to the task level. And in the case of machinery level as well, so if you think about the hand-arm vibration, something like that, you're actually looking at the actual machine they're using and how many hours they're using. So, in order to be safe, you need to be healthy, right? And the physical and mental well-being is paramount always to any occupational health provider. So Stuart, you would have experienced this a lot in your career, and you said to me you wouldn't have let someone out the door unless they met all of the safety requirements, the health and safety requirements, right? So let's keep moving on. So the next question around occupational health is, I've got a little bit of latency here. Is the slides progressing?
There you go.
Okay. So the next topic is, if you think about UK construction and civil engineering today, there's about 3 million people that work in construction, civil engineering. It's actually about 9% of the overall working population in the UK. And in terms of the roles that people do on building sites or house building sites, what we need to do is to be able to define their roles based on whether they're doing a safety critical role and a non-safety critical role. And just a little bit of a shout out for Tony Shooter here on the commit to drones. The reason we're actually presenting here is that the conversation that Tony and I had at FutureWorks in February earlier this year was really about how the drone community needing to keep line of sight of the drones and now getting pulled into a world where they're perceived as a safety critical role, and they're now going through the same processes as the crane operator or as the JCB driver. So you're now seeing that this is how our great business partners in occupational health are teeing up the services, that what they need to do by looking at the task to bring it back to the role, to create the guidelines in the industry, to really figure out what's safety critical and non-safety critical role, and then make sure that they're teeing up the right occupational health services. Next slide, please. And I would genuinely say, if you ever go and have a chat with any occupational health provider, they would talk passionately about both these things. So we know that we need to have compliance in terms of having the safety critical medicals in place. So in a world where we're caring about compliance, what actually the occupational health community also talk about is surveillance. What does surveillance mean? It means that I'm going to take a worker and I'm going to look at a vital, say a lung function, multiple times, and I'm going to look at the trend of that and make sure that the physical well-being, and the same thing is now starting actually on the mental well-being as well. You're seeing a little bit, certainly all of the things that I've attended, I've noticed as well that there's a big appetite as well to think about the mental health side as well, not just the physical side. So occupational health surveillance is really, really important. That's another set of services. But what we're starting with is what you see there on the top, which is the safety critical worker. There's different types of medicals that we have. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we've got the right credentials in place that come from the occupational health provider and then through the whole ecosystem. So say to the plant hire company, through to the tier one construction company who's owning the site, maybe up to the joint venture, all the way up to the government, the HS2, the Hinkley points. What we need to assure that is everyone is fit for task within this relationship. Next slide. And then when we think about what does this actually mean for the worker, what it actually means is the worker is typically going to go through a process. Sometimes this can be 45 minutes to an hour, but what happens is they provide their personal information. They then have to fill in a questionnaire that takes them through a journey of all of their health. They have to declare their health, and then the occupational health practitioner will then take them through the physical part of the medical, where they're going to do things like height, weight, BMI, take the blood pressure, do the eye test. Drugs and alcohol, sometimes incorporated, fully incorporated into a safety critical worker medical. Sometimes it's a standalone function as well. So there's different things that happens there. But what we're trying to get through to, which is really, really important, is the worker fit? Is the worker fit with restrictions, or is the worker unfit? So they're the three big classifications. And then what the occupational health provider would do is provide the restrictions and the recommendations to both the worker and also to the vendor that would be employing the worker, so that they tee up both types in terms of the restrictions. So that's the way the medical operates, and the worker has to be, sometimes they come to a medical center, but other times it's the occupational health provider going to the company and sitting on site and doing these medicals. And then just to finish out, so I can tee up to the next part. You talk to occupational health providers and they'll happily tell you about stories of where they get the phone call that they never want to have, right? And that's where someone from the industry is calling across and saying, hey, did you issue this certificate? And there is a, there is an element of fake certificates that happen in the industry. So and that's why really we are here talking about this conversation in terms of, and what typically happens, what can happen is say one person goes in from medical, then they get a copy of the PDF, and that will have on it the logo, the names, the date of births, and it will have even the accreditations and things like that. Then it's then that can get photoshopped. So we will have there are an element of fake certificates in the industry. So what we need to do as a community is make those immutable and make them orchestrated through, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's Eddie's section. I hope I did it justice. We'll be playing the recording back to him, but that's how occupational typically works in their engagement model. It's just sort of where digital health meets digital construction. Okay. So let's, if you could just progress the slides. I'm still seeing the questionnaire, by the way. There you go. If you can move beyond the certificates to the next section. So if we bring this up a level and we think about this as a system, as a model, what are we talking about? On one side, we've got the issuers, and it's not just the occupational health providers. We've got training organizations. We've got things like the CSCS schemes. We've got like the HGV licenses. We've got insurances. So you've got a set of issuers on one side, and then you've got the subject in the middle that we need to get all of the credentials together. So in order for, say, a plant hire company to get someone placed on site, they need to pull together all of these credentials, and then they need to get the worker through their site induction. So that then moves to the principal or the tier one site owner world, where they have to make sure that the induction happens on day one, they're basically safety assured. And of course, if you think about the whole ecosystem above that, there's all of those joint ventures that own all the big projects, and there's the government or the government agencies, I see there on the slide. But there's the government agencies that sit above that, all the way up to the HS2, the Hinkley Point. So you see how everyone in the system should be interested that we've got assurance and compliance in place that the workers are fit for work. So that's the system state. So Chibuza, let me just bring you into the conversation. So we had a talk about this system, when we first, and one of the questions I sort of asked you, and Chibuza, by the way, runs the whole engineering side of our organization. Every product we deliver around the world it comes through Chibuza's function. So if we just move to the next slide, the question I asked Chibuza is, if I gave you a magic wand and you could just reorganize this system, what would it look like? And this is what we came up with. So Chibuza, first question to you. I see a self-sovereign model. What does that mean?
Okay, thanks, Aid. Self-sovereign models just simply refers to giving control back to the owner of a credential or an identity, in this case, giving the power to determine what happens to the credential, how it is shared, who has access to it, and who is able to utilize any parts of it at any point in time, including the ability to revoke access to that data. Because if you think about it, in this scenario, we're talking about credentials of workers, of people, and these documents will flow through different hands. So thinking self-sovereign means thinking, how can you give some level of control to that user, to that worker, so that he is able to determine who has access, give consent to who has access to his information, and if need be, revoke it in time.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and when it becomes relevant, if you think about it, I talked about fit with restrictions and unfit. Obviously, if someone's fit, it should flow very easy. If someone's fit with restrictions, it's really down to the verifier to actually verify the certificate. They're going to look at it and look at the restrictions, and they might need to, say, do an eye test or do something before they get placed on site. So it's really important that we empower eventually, not maybe in Horizon 1, but eventually, we, just like lots of other industries, we move to self-sovereign. And the other thing that implies, and this is what today's big topic is about, is then we leverage the blockchain for that. Blockchain, typically you don't move the information, you just verify the information and you leave it in the hands. So thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Shay. So Shay is at Amazon Web Service. He's a partner of ours, SeamFix. He's helping us to figure out what's the right way to configure the solution for blockchain in this track. So Shay, over to you. So perhaps the why, what, how of blockchain.
There we go. I couldn't unmute. That's funny things of audio issues. All right, so welcome everybody. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you, Adrian, for handing it over. Yeah, so we're going to dig into really digital assets, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, Web3. We're going to talk about kind of all the different surrounding technologies around blockchain. So Adrian, SeamFix, and the COMIT team, thank you very much for the intro. I'm really excited to be here. I'm in Southern California this morning, so you'll see the orange tree behind me. My name is Shai Perenik. I'm the tech and segment lead for blockchain and Web3 at AWS. Next slide, please. And my role is specifically aligned with the partner organization. So what that means is I specifically work and answer the question on how do we accelerate our partner in the public, in permissionless and private and permissioned ecosystem. So really looking for ways to accelerate our partners, whether that's new technologies, joint strategies, or long-term joint ventures that we work on together. I've been at AWS for a little over 5 years. I've had the pleasure of working in a couple of different organizations, including a professional services organization, as well as solution architecture within a couple of different business segments. And it's really been a joy the last 5 years. For me, I love everything about Web3, blockchain, and really all the surrounding technologies because I really see it as a real potential for our future. And what does it mean, 5, 10 years from now when my kids are older and they're now in public and they're out there working in fields like construction, real estate, or IT or anything else? How does that affect their daily lives and operations? And I really think that this technology will bring forth a lot of awesome changes. So we're going to talk about some of those today. If you want to follow me at all, please look at Twitter at ChaiSS or on LinkedIn. Next slide, please. Anything that I talk about today, again, is just for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take any of the information as financial advice. If I do mention a certain protocol, a project, a currency of sorts, a chain of sorts, it's purely for informational, educational purposes only. It's not financial information of any kinds. Next slide, please. We're going to be talking about a couple different topics today. And so some of the things on our agenda are really going to start with the basics of what blockchain is. Then we're going to jump into kind of the basics of getting started in blockchain. We're going to compare permissioned private chains versus permissionless and public chains. Then we're going to talk about the state of adoption. And we're going to talk about some real use case in the real world, and particularly the industry adoption that aligns closely with construction and real estate. So, I wanted to start off first explaining really the foundations of what Web3 is, right, and what blockchain is and kind of what that falls in. And now when you hear a lot of these technologies like self-sovereign identity, blockchain, those generally fall into the category of Web3. Next slide, please. We should be on the one that says Web3. One more. Yep. So just to give you a quick visual, if we think about Web 1, really the Web 1 society was really all about, reading the content on the web. You think about AOL, you think about Yahoo, you think about sites like that, right? It was all about us reading and consuming that content. Web 2 was really about reading and now writing content and creating a society of creators. And it became really the creation society or the creation consumption society. So it was all about now creating content, and whether that's maybe things like Facebook, MySpace that came out, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook and Tumblr and all these different things, or even Amazon reviews that was back in the early 2000s. That was Web 2. It was about contributing back that content. So Web 3 really only adds the ownership component. And it's kind of returning us to a little bit of the roots of the web originally, right? And returning that ownership of data back to the user so that now as a user, I own my data, right? And so keeping that concept in mind, let's move to the next slide. When we think about Web 2, we traditionally thought of a very client to server model. Next slide, please. And so yeah, very much where, a client, a specific client like my laptop is communicating with a single entity server. and maybe have many clients connecting to the server, right? This is very much how the web operates today. Again, in this simplistic model. Web3 really changes that and really introduces more of a peer-to-peer model. And again, this is not necessarily new. This is something that we did back in the, between the 70s and 80s with the ring networks and other kind of networks that we were building at the time, very similar to peer-to-peer networks, right? And so that's what Web3 is adding, is that peer-to-peer component. And we're going to dig into that a little deeper in the next couple of slides. So next slide, please. So another way to think about the network, another way to think about blockchain specifically is think about blockchain as a network, right? And when we talk about a network is generally a network of nodes. Nodes are basically just servers. They could be computers. They could be things like Raspberry Pis. It could even be my phone. They could even be a low-power device, such as even an Android watch or an Apple Watch. So any device with any kind of computational power can be a node, and a blockchain network is comprised of many nodes, right? The more nodes on the network, the more decentralized the network is. And that's kind of the whole idea behind public and permissionless networks. And we're going to talk about the difference between permissionless and private networks in a couple of slides here. But keep in mind that network concept, right? And that's really that inner gray ring that you see there in the middle. That's really the blockchain network. Then we have this concept of side chains, or we might hear layer 2 chains. You'll hear me use the phrase a lot, chains, and you'll hear the phrase blockchain. We're going to talk about what makes up a blockchain in a second. But for the sake of terminology, just think of chain or network as kind of the same thing here. So when we think about those side chains, right, or just those side networks, those are networks that just sit adjacent to the main network. So there's different use cases, but for simplicity's sake, think of it that way. Now, we need ways to connect our networks together, right? That's really important. Otherwise, we get what's called blockchain islands. And in order to connect the networks together, we need bridges. And now there's different ways of doing bridging, and we're not going to get into all the details on that slide here. But that's the general concept. So we need ways to communicate between different blockchain networks. The bridges let us do that. One of the challenges that we have in the blockchain world as well is, because we're talking about a distributed network, is getting data from the outside world or getting data from outside entities. And one of the ways that we solve that is with a sort of tool or a protocol called an oracle. Now, there's many different oracles, there's many different ways to get data, there's many different vendors and offerings out there for data oracles, but that is the way that we get data from the outside world. And so a company like Amazon or any other company out there can submit their data to an oracle, and then the blockchain network consumes their data through that oracle. So again, next slide, please. And so that kind of outlines the network when we think about the blockchain network. And we want to dig in a little deeper, right? We want to ask the question, really, what makes this technology really different and really unique, and why I'm so excited about it, and I think it's really a big future. Let's look at a simple example, right? If we say the example of buying a house, we have our shopper, right? Our buyer of the house is Alice, and our seller of the house is Bob. Well, today, when you want to buy and sell a house, you have to go through a whole bunch of intermediaries. You work through appraisals, you work through an inspector, you might work through a broker, a real estate agent, many other, depending on the state that you're in, and certain laws and requirements of that area. And one of the challenges is there's intermediaries, right? The funds have to move between all those resources. The documents have to move between all those resources. We hope that those documents are actually digitized, and that makes the process much easier. But that's not always the case, right? We still often deal with paper records, especially when we're dealing sometimes with antiquated governmental systems. That sometimes is the case, that there's antiquated paper still around. And so what if we took all that logic and that is sort of captured in this intermediary process, and we took that process and made it into code, right? And we considered code as law, because once you contribute code to a blockchain network, in general, most of the time, you cannot change that code. So it's what we call immutable. And so you contribute that code, right? That defines how the real estate process works, how the house sale works, any taxes, any fees, any maybe penalties that you're paying because you have maybe something like asbestos or something in the house. So any of those things can be captured as code. And then it's simply Alice and Bob interacting with that code to complete their transaction, right? And they can exchange data, they can exchange funds and assets because of that. And so it really enables a whole nother use case. And so let's go to the next slide, and we're going to kind of dig into this topic a little more to help us understand really the blockchain before we kind of move on to getting started and stuff like that. And so again, I said before, it's all about peer-to-peer communication. And that's really one of the key things, is that we want to be able to enable that peer-to-peer communication. And so in a blockchain network, I don't have to communicate directly with Bob. I don't have to communicate directly with one contract. I don't have to communicate, one-to-one. It's not necessarily a one-to-many relationship either. It's a one-to-any relationship. And so a contract that does a real estate transaction can call another contract. And I say contract as in an application, right? So an application on the blockchain network, we call it a contract. So that application can call another application, that can call another application, and they can be built on top of each other, kind of like Legos. You can stack them however you feel fit. And it creates a really exciting way to enable the consumer, because now the consumer can interact with any one of those applications, or can interact with the main application, can interact with other peers. And so it's enabling a whole new way really to communicate programmatically between either people or between code and applications. So next slide, please. I know when we think about the smart contract, right, and kind of that layering that I talked about, we often will akin it to a layer cake. And so I call this the smart contract cake. It's very common, you'll see this as you kind of dig into different protocols and different projects, either personally or for your enterprise and your business. And you'll find a lot of what's built in this space is really built on top of each other. And that's actually what's really exciting about this space too, is that fact that anybody can build any piece and can build on top of each other, and you get a whole new use case just sometimes by combining different Lego pieces together. So again, sometimes an infinite option of possibilities, and it's just super exciting. Just think about that contract cake as you're kind of working with different applications and protocols, especially as you're digging into security. It's an important concept to keep in mind. Let's go on the next slide, and we're going to talk about what actually happens when you conduct a blockchain transaction. So when I conduct a blockchain transaction, that might be on my phone, it might be on a hardware wallet, it might be on a software wallet, it might be via another application. We'll talk about that in a second. But in short, I am creating a transaction on my phone, which just means basically I'm agreeing to something, just I'm validating something. I do that with what I have called a private key, right? And so my private key is only kept on my phone in my case, or maybe it's a hardware device. And I sign that transaction, right? It's kind of like a signature with your hand paper signature. You have a digital signature as well. When you sign that transaction, there is a private key, which again I keep, and there's a public version of that key. Now we're not going to go into something called public key encryption or PKI, but that's something if you're curious about to dive into, just look up PKI or private key infrastructure. So I have that public key. I submit that key to the network. The idea is that the blockchain network is validating that transaction, right? Confirming that it is a valid transaction, it meets the network's requirements, it meets the application's requirements. That's all done via code, and it's all done via something we call the consensus algorithm. Now that's where you hear proof of work, you hear proof of stake, you hear maybe sometimes that proof of work is inefficient, and there's different kinds of proof of things, right? There's proof of history, space and time, there's proof of space, there's all these other ones that are out there, proof of authority, for example. So they're all just different ways that the network comes to an agreement. A way to think about this is kind of like a neighborhood ordering pizza, where I might order a pizza, I might ask two of my neighbors, hey, do you want cheese or pepperoni? We all agree on cheese. We then go ask the next group of three, what do you agree on? Is it cheese or pepperoni? Then we go on the next group. So it's just that concept of forming a consensus agreement. And again, there's different ways to go upon that, just like we can go upon different ways to agree upon our pizza. Once we have that agreement though, that's what we call the block, and that's what gets submitted into the blockchain network. So that's why we call it a blockchain, because we have a set of blocks that are formed in a chain because they're cryptographically tied to each other, and they cannot be modified after they get submitted. So next slide, please. So all the stuff that we talked about really kind of falls into 4 layers. And we started off on the left side where we talked about really the layer 1, the foundational, core blockchain pieces. We talked about some of the layer 2 things like the oracles out there. Chainlink is a good example of an oracle. Sometimes layer 2s are also used as scaling to help that layer 1 scale. You'll often hear Bitcoin with Lightning. You'll hear of Ethereum and Polygon. It's very common that we have that because just, you can't change some of the underlying components of that network. It's very difficult to change it. And so you need those scaling resources. The Web3 is really the applications that you're interacting with. That's really the layer 3 that's there, right? That's what we call the Web3 application layer. And then finally, you have your interface layer, and that's the your wallets, your software keys, maybe it's on your phone, maybe it's a hardware device like I mentioned before. It's how you're interacting with the blockchain. So keep those 4 layers in mind as we kind of go through this next slide and as we really continue on your sort of blockchain and Web3 journey. And let's dig into a little further, right? Let's talk about how you get started in this. And so let's go on to the next slide. You really want to think about, 2 sides of digital assets or cryptocurrency or blockchain Web3 as you get started. Tokens and NFTs. And tokens are really a token. Think about like a token you had maybe as a kid that represented something. Maybe it had value, maybe it didn't have value. My tokens as a kid were Pongs, the little cardboard pieces. And, so those are tokens, right? Again, they can have value, they don't have to have value. They can represent a certain value of data. They can represent a certain value of information about maybe a person. Again, it's just data. So it's just that's what it is, it's a token. The difference is now then we have NFTs, and NFTs are just a non-fungible token. And just the term non-fungible means that there can only be one of them. And you've probably seen maybe a lot of things about art and music and profile pictures and kind of sometimes silly stuff like that associated with NFTs. That's part of the growing. That's part of the growing of the industry, right? It's part of the maturing process of the industry. And what we're seeing, and I'll talk about this in a couple more slides, is really a lot of maturity around NFTs, more when it comes to around utilities. So think about NFTs less of like the art and the output of it, and think more of the certificate. Think of more what we're validating, right? Because we have a cryptographically verifiable record that says that that piece of art or that piece of music is genuine. And so what can you now do when you have that certification? And that's a lot what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about certification. And what does it mean to certify somebody's health or somebody's licenses or permissions and things that they have in a certain application. So let's go on to the next slide. Once you understand those token NFTs, you'll really want to understand really custody versus non-custody. And whether this is personal for your own self because you're venturing into this world and you're curious about digital assets, and cryptocurrencies, or it's because you're looking at your enterprise and you're trying to build an application, you really need to think through whether you're going to be a custody model or you're going to be a non-custody wallet. And what it really comes down to is who owns those keys. I mentioned before that there's a private key. Well, who owns it, right? In my case, I'm a geek. I love this stuff. I do this stuff all the time. I will custody my wallet. So I have what's called a non-custodial wallet or a self-custody wallet. I have control of my funds. I have control of everything. I own all that stuff, right? It's all under my control. Now, my mother, I am not going to custody her wallet, right? I don't want that responsibility. And so I have for her, for example, a custodial wallet. And so custodial wallet or custodying a private key, for example, just means it's held by a secure entity. So that can be any third party. There's Coinbase, there's Copper. There's so many other providers out there that provide custody services. And so if you're building an enterprise application and you're looking at your customers, you really have to decide what your model is. Are you going to have a custody model where you hold the keys for your customers, or maybe you partner with somebody to hold those keys? Or do you put it on the customer and have them hold the keys to their wallet, right? It depends on your user base. Now you can have a hybrid model as well, so you can have both. But that's an important model to think through. And this is something that we often will jump right into when we talk about NFTs. And we talk about NFTs for different use cases, like certifying a vehicle maybe, or certifying a sports event. We'll talk about the user model of what does it mean, can the user actually custody with the wallet or not. All right, let's move on to the other slide. We have a couple more slides to get through. So I want to talk a little bit about private and permissionless chains and what the difference is there, because you're going to run into those a lot in the enterprise space. For a visual, let's go on the next slide. You would think about our private and permission chains, let's think about private permission first. We'll start on the right side. And so our private permission chain are really controlled by one authority. The whole point is I have a network, I set up that network. Maybe let's call it Shy Chain. I can control who is on Shy Chain, right? Who is allowed on there, who can conduct what on there, how the consensus algorithm works. I control everything, right? That is a private chain. That is a central authority or permission chain. Now, what we're seeing a lot in the industry is something more called a consortium chain, where it's not just Shy Chain, it's maybe something like a COMIT chain, right? Where it's a consortium or a group of organizations or a wide industry coming together and collaboratively together, building a network together that suits their industry use case. And this is a challenge. We've seen a lot of sort of back and forth between organizations and industries. We've seen a lot of stalling that happens. And it's really important that there's a steward within the community or the consortium that pushes things forward, move things along. Otherwise, things do stall. Then the other side of things is the public, right? And that's what you've heard a lot about in the news. You've probably heard a lot about online in different places, right? About public chains. There's things like Ethereum, Phantom, Avalanche, Solana. Any of those other networks out there, there's a whole bunch of them, right? There's at least several thousand, and there's probably at least 20, 30 in my head. There's a whole bunch of different public chains out there, and all of them, for the most part, are publicly accessible, right? That's the whole kind of idea. They're permissionless. Anybody can get on the network. Anybody can build anything on that network. Anybody can conduct transactions on the network. And that's what kind of enables this future of infinite possibilities, because we don't know how people are going to build, right? We don't know if they're going to be public, we don't know if they're going to be private, permissionless. Will they build something hybrid in between? Will it be something a consortium with also public? And so there's all these cool use cases that we're seeing that combine both private and permissionless chains and public and private and permissioned and public and permissionless chains, and combine them into use cases. So again, the industry and the space is evolving very quick, and this is the start of it. So let's talk about some more of the trends that we're seeing in the industry as well, beyond really the private and permissionless chains here. And let's go 2 slides forward just to move a little quicker. So we have really the kind of some of the trends that we're seeing, right? Really the identity is a big piece that we're seeing, and this is still an area that needs to mature a lot, but it's all about, you know, bringing that ownership back to the user. And what does that mean now that the user has ownership? What does it mean now that they have that control of that identity on their own, and what things can enable? So it's exciting use cases like I own my medical records, maybe I own my educational records, and I can present those records to whoever needs to see them. You know, if I have medical certifications that says I'm fit for work, I can present that fit for work certification back to my employer. And so we're seeing a lot of those use cases pop up around identity. It's becoming more and more popular, and we're also seeing a lot more tooling develop in this space. It's still early, but again, very exciting things to come, probably later to the year and towards next year. A lot of competitions as well in layer 1s and layer 2s, right? A lot of the identity things and a lot of things that we're building really are built on top of those layer 1s, those foundational networks, like I mentioned before, as well as the layer 2s, which help that scaling. But in order to have that communication between those layer 1s and layer 2s and all the different blockchain networks that we have, we need to have interoperability. We need to have those bridges I mentioned before. And what we're seeing is a much bigger move towards not just bridging, but inter-network communication, inter-network messaging. And what this means for the user is less of a concern about what network you're actually on. And so while this is an area of passion for me, I love digging into interoperability, it's very feasible that in the next year or so, to the normal average user, they're not going to even notice what network or chain they're on underneath. It's not going to be, they're not going to care. And that's really when interoperability works the best, is when you don't notice that bridge. You know, think about when you drive sometimes, you know, you'll cross over a bridge and maybe you don't really notice that it's a bridge, depending on the landscape and stuff like that. So that's the level of, you know, obfuscation that we want to get to. Now, what we're seeing because of all this identity stuff and all the layer 1, layer 2 developments, all the interoperabilities, we're seeing a lot of NFT utilities come up. And NFT utility is really about adding utility to an NFT, right? I mentioned that certification before. Well, what can I now do that I have that certification, right? What can I now go on and do from here? Can I now go access a certain event? Can I access something else? What does it enable me to do? Well, enables cool use cases like things in the metaverse, which is moving data between different blockchain networks and giving utility to that NFT so I can do something in a certain metaverse, do something else in a different metaverse. And that's where we're also seeing a lot of evolution. All right, let's move on to some of the use cases. I know I'm running a little time on here, so I'm gonna go through some of the use cases and then we'll wrap up. And so let's talk about the kind of general use cases, right? There's a whole bunch of different use cases that we're seeing, whether it's insurance and healthcare, and we can go on the next slide, in manufacturing and industry. There's almost every industry that we talk to has some sort of use case when it comes to blockchain. And really the simple way to think about it is just a public network. It's a public database. And so assuming all the security constructs are in place, what can you now do with a public database? And so I love this example by the South Korean government, where they were able to take their licenses and put that on the blockchain network and be able to use that as a way to certify their customers. And certify their users and their identity customers on their network, right? Whether it's things like COVID testing and COVID vaccine shots, or other government access. Maybe they have certain training that gives them certain access to certain things within the department. So really good opportunity here for digital identity and digital certification within the government entity. Let's go on the next slide. And we'll talk about Workday, right? Workday had a similar use case where they wanted to provide digital certifications for verifiable employee credentials, right? Saying that employees verify to work at a certain location based on health standards and things like that. So again, another use case where Workday saw the advantage of using blockchain as that backend for their data set. So let's move on to the next one. And I really like this last one because it's talking about government, and we're a little tight on time here, so I'll move a little quick. But when we talk about government in general, again, it's always a challenge moving old record systems. But the county of Riverside was able to do it. They went and built their blockchain network, moved all their public records into the blockchain network, and now all those records are all digitized and much more accessible to all the third parties that use that digital system. And so I'll finish off on the last slide, and then I'll hand it over to you, Adrian. Thank you for giving me the extra time here. And so just think about blockchain as a public database. That's what it is. And as you think of your use case, think about how do you make those public databases, and how do you build more utility and functionality for your users when that data is public. And again, assume the security is there. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll hang around and answer some questions towards the end. Thank you very much to the CFIX team for the time.
Thanks, Shay. So let's bring this all back together just quickly, because we're just running a little bit of time. But let's talk about actually now what CFIX are doing. So we're running a pilot. So as I said before, we appreciate there's an as-is and a to-be, and we've got the journey now to go on. So we're keeping it very simple to start with. So we're starting the pilot. We have our MVP, which is built, is going to be released on August the 22nd. What's happened as part of that process, we've done 50 to 60 different industry interlocks where we've talked to different levels of our ecosystem. So starting with occupational health, we've talked to plant hire companies, tier 1 construction companies. We've talked to many of the stakeholders. That's how we met COMIT. We've talked to CITB. There's many. We've got inputs from everywhere. And then what we had to do was scale that back and just make sure that we had a minimal viable product. We're now starting a pilot process with K2 Associates, with Eddie Koika and the team. And we're going to do this at the right speed, right? We have to do this at the right speed, because one of the key things is that it's not just, there's a bunch of technophiles on this call, I'm sure, but it's not just about that. It's about legal data and compliance. We have to make sure that we get to tollgate 1, we prove that, get to tollgate 2 and prove that. So in the first instance, we're starting the pilot just with an occupational health company that will be issuing credentials on the blockchain, but at the same time, they will be providing certificates in the traditional way. But they're going to have a few enhancements. I noticed when people register for the event, they were talking about QR codes and photos. It's going to have all of that in there, but at the same time, it's going to be secured on the blockchain. So perhaps, Stuart, we just quickly go to the architecture slide. Just keep going through into our deck. And I just want to bring Chibuza back, because Chibuza, we presented you with this use case here in the UK construction, and we asked you and your team to put together how this would all hang together, if you like. So, and the one thing that I think I always said to you is that don't put ourselves in the middle. That's not what we need to do here, right? So perhaps you could talk about some of those areas. So Stuart, if we can come to the architecture slide, I'm not quite seeing it yet. There you go. The basic building blocks. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, yes, thanks, Aid. So for us, in looking at going through this traditional system, the traditional way of doing things today, if we try to think about the business being the construction companies, the OHSPs, for instance, you realize that at core, there needs to be trust. They want to be sure that any certificate and document that is exchanged between all parties in the ecosystem can be verified and can be seen to be authentic by anybody at any time. Then there's also the concept of removing and eliminating all administrative bottlenecks in the process of issuing these credentials. And then also, of course, you want to save time, you want to save costs, and then you want convenience. We spoke to, a couple of OHSPs that currently manage their processes via Excel, and that is prone to lots of human errors. So underpinning all this in trying to establish a platform that can help improve this process, we realize that there's some foundational capabilities one of which is the blockchain, like Shai has already spoken about, because if we're able to write these credentials, the certificates to the blockchain, then anybody in the ecosystem can at all times authenticate securely. Of course, that also helps us with the legal and compliance bit, because we can always be sure that any certificate that is issued is authentic and immutable. Synfix and her partners obviously have all the right credentials, from the ISO certifications and and all the compliance checks necessary for us to build a system like this. And then also something very important to us is the API model, like you mentioned, Adrian. We don't want to put ourselves in the middle. We want to be sure that we are able to work with everyone in the ecosystem depending on the level of infrastructure they have. So if there's an OHSP today that currently has their existing internal systems, and all they need to do is to consume data, consume credentials from us, they're able to plug into the API infrastructure we have layered on top of the platform, and then they're able to pull or push information as necessary. And of course, because we are starting with the safety medical certificates, like you mentioned in the pilot, but as we prove that, we will need to be able to show that we can build more use cases on top of the platform. Therefore, the platform is a low-code platform, multi-tenant in nature, that allows us build seamlessly additional use cases and to support the different needs of all the different players that will sit on the platform. Of course, I don't want to go into too much details in terms of the delivery vehicles, edge capabilities and all that, but it will be available either on the web via a tablet app in your offices, and also to the workers on their mobile phone. And even though we've spoken about self-sovereignty in the beginning, we don't see that as well. That's just the end, where we want to get to at the end. But what we are doing right now is putting the essential foundational building blocks that enables us to achieve the business requirements at this time, and sets us up to be able to mature, so that when the industry is ready for that level of control by the workers, we all have what it takes to get there.
Thank you. And just to finish up onto the next slide, Stuart. So if this has stoked any interest, we're a community, we're a community here on COMIT. So if it's stoked any interest, reach out to ourselves, through the community. We'd love to chat to you. I don't know whether you're upstream of this or downstream of the thing we're doing, but we're happy to have that conversation with you and share what we're doing. We deliberately didn't do demos or anything today in this call. We can come back to that. So Stuart, let's come through to, we've got a few things to do. We've got the Q&A to do, and we also need to come back to the survey that we took at the beginning. Yeah.
Sure. Can I just add there? If just to reiterate what you just said, if there's any topic areas, just get in touch with me. We mentioned the project a couple of times there. This is an opportunity to, again, reach out and get involved in how technology can help you improve safety. There are a few use cases there that prove its worth. Get involved. There may be some things that you could share, and together, you could leverage some strength. So reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So yeah, question time. So I don't know whether you want to go through the questions at registration, whether you want to go through a couple of questions that you've got that came in. How do you want to play it? Do you want to go forwards now to the registration questions, or?
Yeah, I think we got, just get the registration questions. There's some fantastic questions, but let's just, I was really enthused by this. I was really enthused that actually there was this awareness of fake health passports in the industry from this community. It was great to see that nobody disagreed that actually introducing something like a blockchain technology would be, and that relates to number 4, where we wanted to make sure with Shay that we could just educate, just level set all of ourselves as a community. And it was also great to hear, that the ideas of QR codes, photos, eliminating things like PDFs that could be shaped after they've been issued was there. So I think the questions at registration really spoke for the value of this session. And then let's start addressing a few of the questions that were asked by the registration. So the first one was, why construction, and do different industries have the similar issues? And the answer is yes. It absolutely is. I mean, in our journey of exploration, we've talked to oil and gas companies, we've talked to mining companies, facilities, we've talked to warehousing, transport and logistics. There's lots of industries that require a health assessment or a health medical to be able to go and do the work. And there was a big acknowledgement of things like fake certificates as well. So we've done a lot of exploring, and not, by the way, not just in this country as well. We've been talking overseas as well, but there is that awareness. And why construction? To be fair, we have to control scope, and it was the UK construction industry that stepped up first in our journey and showed the most interest. I'm talking about big tier 1 construction industries and plant hire companies. So we decided as a team to focus there. So the second question, and Shay, I just want to bring you in on this one. Is blockchain sustainable for small scale transactions and SME projects, or does it need to be a big problem to justify the IT effort? And by the way, I hope people can see that we have the big problem here. So just thoughts on that.
No, I mean, there's definitely some big problems that are being solved with blockchain, like verifiable credentials is a great example, but there's plenty of also very small use cases that are being solved. I mean, things like reward pools, just, simple things like, having a prize pool and who wins that prize pool, a simple game of cards. There's so many simple examples that are out there, whether in the finance or in gaming or in just things like transaction management. So no, it does not have to be. And there's plenty of underlying sort of chains and toolkits and things like that that make it really easy to build. And I would say reach out to the CMFix team, reach out to your COMIT contact. Happy to get involved as well from the AWS side. And it's definitely, every use case is an opportunity. However, I would say don't start with the technology as a solution, right? Really ask yourself, is blockchain really adding value here? And if it does, then proceed forward.
Great, thank you. And Chibuza, there was a question as well, the role of biometrics. And what's the role of biometrics in what we're doing here? So.
Oh yes, well, identity is at the core of any credential issuing system. It starts with identifying who the credential is being issued to and the ability to ensure that he is who he says he is. So biometrics plays a role. For instance, I don't know if they saw the sample certificate you showed earlier that had the picture of the person. So the ability to identify and confirm the ID document that the person presents, and then also tied to the physical person standing in front, be it via a face to ID match. That's an example of a biometric match to ensure that the person presenting the identity document prior to be issued the certificate is the actual owner of the certificate. And then thereafter, every other time it's presented, you can also do a match if need be to ensure that it's still the right person and nothing has happened in the, down the chain. We've had issues of where someone lifts an ID number and adds it to his own picture and tries to create a new identity for a new certificate. So biometrics plays a role here, is important, and it's well covered in the proposition we have.
Yeah, and it's also just for the UK members here, but there's the Data Protection Digital Information Bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. It is about the Digital Identity Trust Framework. So you're going to hear more about this in the UK in terms of digital identity and how we use biometrics in all areas. And just last thing from me, we got asked about the uptake from the OHSPs and things as like whether drugs and alcohol will be included. So the answer is yes. We're going to try and get a lot of the services, but we need to start with safety critical work and medicals. And just fresh from a conversation I had this morning with one of the independent OHSPs, I think the answer to that was we've been talking about this since 1996. The answer that came back to me from an independent. So you've obviously got the providers and you've got the independents, but there is an appetite. But I would encourage that we're the innovators and we need to help that community with the change management. So Stuart, back to you.
Yeah, thanks guys. Hey, I've got a question here from the floor. This is coming from a health and safety practitioner who's been with major construction companies for a while, and he said he's asked the question: should all construction workers be classified as safety critical? I would say yes. I think there was maybe a suggestion otherwise.
Do you know? Ours is to, this is the same in any process, right? But we have governance and we have like accreditation schemes, you know, like CCOS, Safe and Effective Quality Occupational Health Services. And I'd call out an amazing lady that I work with, a mentor, which is Pippa Crouch, who sits on the special interest group for the Society of Occupational Medicine. Even though she runs her own occupational health practice, Pippa's been mentoring us, and actually even a safety critical worker medical is not legislative. It's just sort of the HS2s and the big government agencies are asking for this level. So all we can do as a technical community is follow the standards that are given to us. And at the moment, they're not defined, I guess, as safety critical. But as you saw with drones, things get added all the time, right? Things that get added. I'm sure the occupational health community would love every role to be safety critical, because it makes things very black and white, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So that was from Roy. Thanks, Roy Pearson, for that question. Brilliant. I would just want to reiterate what was said also earlier. The business about sharing learnings through industry, it's something that COMIT's been doing for quite a long time now. We need to carry it on. It's a reciprocal thing, because it, you know, and it can go both ways. We're always keen to learn from you know, automotive, shipbuilding, aerospace, whatever it is. We've even had ties with NASA in the past, and in fact we continue to have ties with them. There's lots of things, you know, that they say that you know, building a space, the space station is comparable with doing it on Earth, which, yeah, fair enough. Let's hear more of it. There's lots of opportunities to learn. So that's where that's what I'm meaning. We're just about on time. No more questions here, but what I would like to say is thanks to everybody here today. Thanks for everybody tuning in. Thank you very much for the questions. I'd like to just slide along and thank the sponsors. So that's Virgin Media O2 and Snugs. Snugs is one of the partners in the safety project. I've been asked the question already, when's the recording available? Well, as soon as the thing's downloaded, I will process the thing and it'll be on the website. You'll get notified of it fairly shortly. All the recordings are on the website. I want to also say thanks to Ian and Jerry for support and the production facilities. Thanks to you guys, thanks to panelists. We do have another happy hour, which is in August. The date's to be confirmed once we get past the holidays, but it's approximately 1 month away. The other thing as well is Community Day. You heard me say earlier there was 2 this year. We've got the next one, which is October the 6th, and that's in Milton Keynes, supported by Sunbelt. Please reach out to me if you want to get involved in that. And then it's a case of thank you very much and have a great weekend. But before we part, I'd just like to go around the room, if I may, and start with Chibuza. Anything else to add to today's session?
No, nothing much from me. I'm excited to have had this session, and we look forward to engaging more with the community in the coming days, especially as we start to make progress with our pilots and also share the proof of, you know, how the progress with the rest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shay, thank you very much for breaking into your holidays and joining us today. Much appreciated.
Sure. I would just say my final thing is just be vocal about your use case, right? As you're using the technology and you're playing around, you're testing things. If something doesn't work the way you expect it to, just be vocal about it and be a champion and leader within your organization for change. There's so many opportunities with technology. We really don't know where the future is going to be without people actually pushing for it. So I advocate for everybody to be that change agent. Agents for change is what we need. Absolutely. Thank you. Aid, over to you.
Yeah, finally, just to wrap up, I'm just going to give, you know, like health goes with safety. Health and safety are hand in glove, right? So if we get to the point where we look after the physical and mental well-being of the workforce, guess what? Right, we're going to see higher productivity. We're going to achieve our targets on productivity, cost saving, and we're going to meet our compliance. So let's just keep focusing on the health of the workers. We all owe the workers that. That's really what this is about, I think, for me. it's probably what Eddie's coaching me on and Pippa's coaching on, but the health of the worker is everything, right, in the middle. So thank you for hosting us today. It's been great, and I always enjoy being part of the COMIT community.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us and supporting the opportunity. Just left for me to say, have a great weekend, guys, and we'll catch up soon. All the best.
Take care.
Bye for now. Cheers.
Yeah.
Take care.
Cheers.